Today we are wrapping up my August reading month, and it was a really good one, guys. You'll see when we get into the stats, but it was really, really good. I found my new favorite book of the year so far. I found a new all-time favorite, wrapped up with that, but yeah, it was a really good reading month. I didn't read quite as much as I have the last couple of months, but like, that's fine. I made a ton of progress on ARCs, which was one of my goals for this month, which are advanced readers copies, meaning books that I got from publishers before they came out. Yeah, I feel like this was just productive and wonderful, and you will see in the stats, I did not read anything bad. Nothing. Not one thing that I would tell you like, didn't enjoy this at least a little bit. So let's get into some stats. Then we will talk about my disappointments, my surprises, and my hits. My disappointments are not that disappointing based on what we just said. So in terms of stats, I did read 25 books this month, 16 of which I own, 9 of which came from either the library or subscription service. That was a total of 7,776 pages with an average book length of 311 pages. I did read a couple of really chunky ones in there, so that I didn't think about until just now, but that's also probably why my overall count might be a little lower than the last couple of months. Oh, and also I'm in progress on a couple of chunky ones. So anyway, side note, you guys don't care about that. The average age of book that I read this month was 7 years, which is not quite as good as I would like. I like that to be closer to 10 years, but what you gonna do? But the average length of time something had been on my TBR was 6 months, which is exactly where I like it. Paid for 20% of the books that I read this month, and the average cost of the books that I paid for was $2.45, which probably means that there were some free ebooks in the mix, bringing that average down. Then, in terms of genre, a little surprising. So my biggest genre this month was what I would call speculative romance. So this is either sci-fi romance or paranormal romance or urban fantasy romance, all that kind of stuff, which I really love. It's if I had to pick one genre of romance that's my favorite, I would probably say speculative romance. I've been reading a lot of palate cleansing sci-fi romances this summer, which has been a lot of fun. So that makes sense, followed by contemporary romance. Again, romance tends to be my kind of palate cleanser in between like chunkier books. So that was next, then mystery, then fantasy, then nonfiction, and it looks like I read one sci-fi and one historical romance this month. And then finally, rating wise, my average rating was 3.64, which has to be one of the highest I've had in quite some time, because I had no books that I rated lower than 3 stars. Yes, you heard that correctly. No books I rated lower than 3 stars. It looks like the most frequent rating I gave was 3.5, but I also had 7 4-stars, 2 4.5s, and 1 5-star. Y'all, this month was so good. And then in terms of challenges, like I said, I've not really been keeping track of that as much this summer because I just needed a little break, but I think I read 9 books from publishers, 8 or 9 books from publishers, which was fantastic. That means I only have, I think, like a handful left that I need to read for the rest of the year. So that is gonna free up some of my reading time for other challenges I'm working on that I'm gonna get back to after Labor Day. And then, I'll wrap up my Ripped Bodice Summer bingo board. You can see it here. I actually got more bingos than I was expecting. So there you go. Good job me there, I guess. I wasn't really purposely reading to it, but it's been fun seeing what has qualified based on what I happen to be reading. So those were my stats. Now let's start with my disappointments, though I have to again reiterate, these are not that disappointing because nothing I read this month was bad, but I've got 2 that I thought were somewhat disappointing, I guess, in the scheme of what my expectations were. The first book that I think qualifies for that is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. So this is not bad, and actually I'm going to include this in an isolated closed circle 3 mystery review video kind of thing. I'm gonna do this one, The Eighth Detective, and then One by One by Ruth Ware when it comes out. So I won't say too much about this, actually. I'll kind of save most of my thoughts for that. This is not a bad book, but I did give it 3 stars because it didn't really fully live up to what I was hoping to get out of it. It has pieces of an isolated closed circle mystery that I very much enjoy in terms of everybody stuck together, you know, either on an island, which is what the situation is here, or it starts to snow and nobody can leave, or whatever. Like, there's some reason why we're all stuck together, we can't get away from each other, and then somebody dies and we gotta figure out who did it. These types of books can veer more towards a whodunit or more towards a thriller. This one definitely veers more towards a thriller, which I knew going in, so I wasn't expecting too much of a whodunit. The unfortunate thing is this happened to pick almost all of my least favorite tropes of thrillers or character types of thrillers. So while the writing was nice, and while I did really like the setting, and I even kind of enjoyed like the ultimate resolution of the mystery here, it didn't work for me. We'll talk more about it in my full review because it also did something that really drives me nuts in these kinds of books. So I wouldn't like steer someone away from this. I just will tell you if your taste in isolated close circle thriller mystery books is similar to mine, I don't know that this is going to be your favorite. I have, however, seen several people saying, oh, I really love that. So I'm wondering if maybe that's not, if like you don't come to it wanting the isolated close circle mystery bit, maybe you're less disappointed. I don't know. This was 3 stars. It wasn't terrible. I just didn't think it was particularly good. And for me, not worth the hype. So that was one disappointment. The other disappointment, I am going to go ahead and say that Well Played by Jen DeLuca, which I gave 3.5 stars to. So I did like, this is like a B+ kind of book. I did like this book, but it was disappointing because I loved Well Played last year so much. And this is just a little bit of a sophomore slump, in my opinion. The problem I have with this book is the romance itself. I very much enjoyed the character work. I thought that our main character, Stacy in particular, was very compelling, and I really liked the kind of internal conflict she had of she moved home to take care of her mom when she was sick, and now her mom is better, and she's kind of in her mid to late 20s and is trying to figure out, okay, my kind of plans for life really went off track because I needed to be here for my family, and now how do I get back to a life that feels like it's what I'm doing and not just me reacting to this emergency. So I thought that that was really well handled. I really liked, all the different family dynamics and character dynamics. I liked the hero in this. I really liked them together, but the romance I think fundamentally doesn't work because of the setup of it and how long that setup goes. I don't want to spoil if somebody wants to go into this blind, but read the back of the book. What it describes, I was expecting to last for maybe like the first 25 to 30% of the book. It lasts a really long time and therefore made it very hard for me to believe you could bounce back and have just like a normal relationship after that. Even though I very much enjoyed both of the characters, I thought they were really cute together and I liked their ultimate ending up together. I just think that it didn't quite sell me on the journey it took to get there, and I ultimately found both characters to be weirdly kind of passive as well. I don't know, it just didn't quite hit all my buttons. So for that reason, I found it to be somewhat of a disappointment, but we'll absolutely keep reading in this series. Very excited for the 3rd book because it's Mitch in April, and I think that's gonna be a lot of fun. So not like terrible, not something awful, I just not as good as I had hoped it might be. And then transitioning in to surprises, I wanted to mention 2 that came up in my mid-month check-in that I just wanted to reiterate I thought were really fun and surprising. One was In the Study with the Wrench by Diana Peterfreund. I did end up finishing that book later the day that I filmed mid-month check-in, and I just want to mention it really was very fun, very charming. I wasn't sure how the 2nd book in the series was going to go, and that's why I put it as a surprise. I gave it 3.5 stars, I think, ultimately, because there is some pacing issues in this, but I really liked how this was a 2nd book in a YA trilogy of mysteries, that the 2nd book really went somewhere different than the 1st book in a good way. I think it did a lot of build-up work for what's going to happen in the final, and the final bit is very suspenseful, and I'm very excited for that 3rd book. So I was happily surprised that I thought that this one was taking the series in an interesting direction, and that I'm hoping we're not going to be, I think that like this is going to stick the landing in the trilogy. It feels like the author has like a direction that they're going in, which I appreciated. So that was a positive surprise. Another fun positive surprise that I mentioned in the mid-month check-in was Zoryans Game, which was a sci-fi, very like campy sci-fi romance in this series from Michele Mills. This series has a species of aliens who have like fated mates in the way that they know, like they can't pleasure mate. They can only be with their destined mate. And the way you find out somebody is your destined mate is you have like this palm grasping ceremony, because they have like these sensors in their claws, basically. I don't know. It's like some sci-fi nonsense that I enjoy. Like I think like their DNA is like, oh, you're gonna be a perfect, like, we will make perfect children together. This is great. So there's all these like contrived scenarios. The fun of these books is that often it's like a big deal to clasp hands or clasp claws with a potential mate to test mating compatibility. Like it's a big deal in their culture. Often what happens in these books is that there's some like crazy adventure and they accidentally touch palm to palm, and then they find out that they're mates, and oh no, they didn't really want to be mates, or they didn't really want to test mating compatibility or whatever. It's fun. This particular one was a Most Dangerous Game take. So the hero doesn't ever want to find a mate, and the heroine doesn't like him because he's been a jerk to her. And then they crash land on this planet where there is a guy who has a private island where he is hunting species that crash land there, like sentient beings. And it's just super, like, it was like an action adventure, campy romance in space with aliens. It was just so much fun, and I thought it was actually executed pretty well. Like, it knew what it was and it was having fun with it. It was just a lot of fun. Thumbs up for that one. That series definitely gets better as it goes, and I've liked kind of the later ones in the series better than the earlier ones. Those were two that I mentioned in my mid-month check-in. Another pleasant surprise that probably don't need to say too much about because this is a huge book on BookTube is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. I ended up giving this 4 stars. This is the first in a trilogy of books. I have bought and own the next 2 because I was very into this, and I was just very pleasantly surprised. Like, this felt like a breath of fresh air to me in terms of YA dystopia type things I've read in the last few years, because this is one of the rare ones that just doesn't feel like it's trying to be the Hunger Games. It's its own thing. I liked the world building. I really liked the conflict and the characters. Like, everything about this was really working for me. I think the pacing, it dragged on a little long in this book. I was mostly into it the whole time, but I thought it was a little draggy. But I really love the thematic content of this, of helping teens, which is ostensibly the audience here, grapple with, like, what does death do to our perception of what life means. I thought that was like a genuinely interesting and deep question, and it was truly tackled, but in an age-appropriate way. It is quite violent. I don't feel like I need to give a summary of this. It's so ubiquitous, but you know the setup here. It is quite violent based on that setup, but I think it takes that violence really seriously. It's not like glibly violent. Yeah, just all around really love this, and I'm definitely going to keep going in the series. Very into this. Was surprised at how unlike the Hunger Games it was, basically. And then next, I guess we'll talk about N or M by Agatha Christie. So this is one that I am going to do. It's a part of like the full vlog that I've got going on, where I'm vlogging reading the last of Agatha Christie's oeuvre that I am working my way through. So I don't feel like I want to say like a ton here, because you're going to get an entire vlog of my feelings and thoughts about this at some point. But I will say that this surprised me in a very positive way, again, because I didn't have the best luck with The Secret Adversary with Tommy and Tuppence, so I wasn't sure how I was gonna do with any more of the Tommy and Tuppence. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars, and I thought that this was a really interesting reflection on a generation that experienced war twice. So we have Tommy and Tuppence, who were, you know, both served in their own capacities during the First World War, and then now they are kind of in their middle age. They have grown children who are serving in the war, and they are wanting to help and wanting to be a part of the war effort, but because of their age, they don't have as many opportunities to do that. And just reflecting on, I guess it just made me think about that generation in a new way, that they went through 2 such like huge world events pretty close together, really. Like, I mean, they're in their 40s in this book, but they still have plenty of life left. So yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting thinking. That made me think about things in a different way, think about history in a different way. This is a book that was written during World War II when they didn't know what was going to happen, and that is an interesting piece of kind of how this book plays out. Some of the plot is a little bit of nonsense, but not as much as many of the spy thrillers she wrote. Like, this is less nonsense, I feel like, than they often are. So I appreciated that. Yeah, overall, I enjoyed the characters a lot more in this one. I liked Tommy and Tuppence a lot more in this particular book. I really appreciated just what this made me muse on in terms of the historical moment of it. And it was all around just like a good Agatha Christie time. It was written in, I think, 1940. So it's like still peak Christie time. So I enjoyed the writing, just good times all around. So that one was a pleasant surprise. And then I guess, one of these is a hit, but I'm just gonna put these both together because I did read 2 books by Lyssa Cole, both of which I guess made me think about some of the same themes. The reason this is going in surprise is When No One Is Watching by Lyssa Cole is her first thriller. I've said this a couple of times at this point, but I want to keep saying it because I think it is an important data point for people going into this book to know, to have the right expectations, which is the reason this surprised me, is that I perceive that this is much more of a horror novel than a thriller in terms of its pacing. And I think people who are expecting a really like bam, bam, bam kind of thriller may end up getting let down by this. So like, I want to temper that expectation as much as possible. It is still really good. Like, I very much enjoyed this. This is a part of a vlog that is going up on Sunday, so again, I don't feel like I need to get into my full thing here. If you want to hear my full book review, full thoughts, full experience, you can watch that. But overall, what I loved about this in particular, which leads into this book that we'll talk about next, is the sense of community and how marginalized groups of people have to forge these strong communal bonds in order to survive a system, a society that is constantly trying to knock them down. And I think that this really celebrates and treasures those kinds of bonds in a way that I thought was really special and really well communicated. I really loved that about this book, as well as a lot of the themes about, you know, parents aging and dying. That's something that I very much relate to. In my age group, it's sometimes hard to find other people who have experienced that or relate to it. So I appreciate seeing that in the book. I thought the writing was super nice. It was interesting to learn more about the history of this neighborhood in Brooklyn. Overall, I very much enjoyed this. I just think the pacing was a little off for a thriller, which kept me from just like loving it. But speaking of community, I absolutely really loved Let Us Dream by Alyssa Cole, which is also set in New York, but this time it is set in 1919 and it is set in Harlem. And basically this is a historical romance with a Black suffragette who owns her own cabaret in Harlem, like a risque cabaret. The hero in this one is an immigrant from India. He doesn't have like legal status in New York, so like that's part of his conflict. He was a chef. He's trying to decide if he's going to stay in New York or go back to India because he has this like plot of land that his family is tending for him and maybe he wants to claim that. This book is so good. Like first of all, so recently there's been some Twitter dust-ups about what kinds of historical romance marginalized people can be in successfully and like what all you have to address to be able to do that well. There's a whole discourse and I have a lot of thoughts. If you guys are interested in me having a rant about historical accuracy in books, I can do that for you at some point. Let me know if that's something you're interested in, because I have a lot of strong thoughts and feelings about the historical accuracy police and everything that goes along with that. But one tweet, like thread that came out of that I thought was so apt was Courtney Milan was talking about how in historical books where you are trying to show marginalized people having positive endings to story, like romance in particular, happily ever after, but like generally just like not being completely oppressed and that being the only thing that's happening in the story, is she recommends you can't fix like racism writ large or sexism writ large in this book, but you can pick like one town, one neighborhood, one community, and show how in that place people are able to find ways to thrive, ways to succeed, ways to overcome the things that are stacked against them. Like you're not in 1919 New York City going to solve racism, but in this community, we can show a strong Black woman who is fighting for women's right to vote and fighting for her business and fighting for the people who work in her business to thrive. And I just think Alyssa Cole, Courtney Milan said this and she does that super well. Alyssa Cole does that so well in her historicals. And this is a prime example of it. I read it because it was a suffragette and it's August and, you know, it just felt appropriate. But this is a novella that I would highly recommend. I think that that's just such a great example of a different kind of historical setting, different kinds of historical characters than we often see. The writing was great. Oh, okay, one of my neighbors stopped by and she was so cute and nobody would help her. It was so sad. Okay, sorry, now I'm really upset because it was a sweet little old lady. I mean, not old, but like older woman, and nobody was helping her, and community is important. I don't remember anything I was saying about this though. I guess I'll just leave it at community is important. That's what I think both of these books have in common. Alyssa Cole is an absolute queen. Her writing is fantastic. People who are excited to try her in a new genre, I don't think you'll be disappointed, but if you are looking for some of her historical romance work, I highly recommend this book. It was really just a delight, as her books pretty much always are. Okay, and speaking of delights, we're now moving into my hits. And actually, I don't think this is gonna take as long because 3 of these are in a vlog with When No One Is Watching that is coming out this Sunday. So I feel like I've said a lot of what I want to say about those books in that video, so I can mostly just gush about them. But 2 that are not in that video that I did want to mention. First is Crazy Stupid Bromance by Lyssa K. Adams. So here's the skinny on this one. This book has one of my all-time favorite friends to lovers romance pieces of it. The actual romance in this book is fantastic. I loved it. I think for those of us who have experienced some kind of sexual assault or harassment, the like care and love that the dude in this one shows to the heroine who has that background is like so much what you would hope your partner is like. That I thought was really wonderful. I just love that piece of it. However, the problem with this book and the thing that kept it from being higher for me is that there is far too much backstory jammed into one book. Basically, we met the heroine in the previous book. She owns a cat cafe, and that was adorable. And as I mentioned, she does in the second book, you know, it is revealed this traumatic history of sexual harassment, assault that she experienced in the workplace. That's a heavy backstory just by itself. Like, if that was the only thing that this book had in it for her backstory, that would be a lot. There is also then a second big family backstory. So she lost her mother to cancer, which again, I tend to like that as a like that element in books tends to really work for me because it's something I relate to and don't get in my real life all that often from people my own age. So I liked that bit, but she has that happening. And then this other big thing happens with her family. And then there's a additional thing on I don't want to spoil, so I don't want to tell you, but there's then an additional thing on top of that thing with her family. Plus, she's having this friends to lovers romance, which is already complicated because of her history. And then on top of that, it's with a friend. There is just too many emotional conflicts for one heroine in this story. I think if we had heard about her family, maybe if we had met her in the first book in this trilogy and found out a little bit about the family bit and like laid the first layer of groundwork for that, I think this book could have supported the kind of next level it takes. But I think this book is overstuffed with emotional conflict. And while I loved the romance piece of it, and I liked all the family dynamic stuff, I thought that was good, it just was too much for one book to hold. So that's what kept this from being a full like 4.5 or 5 star. But I really enjoyed this. And if you have been enjoying that series, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. You get like the lighter moments of funny undercut with like some real shit in these books, which I like. So that was 4 stars and that was a hit. Though, as I said, I do have that critique. So for whatever that's worth, if you are of similar mind to me in terms of how you like your romance. The other book that is not in that vlog that you guys are going to be seeing on Sunday that I thought I would mention is The Great Influenza by John M. Barry. I was reading this at mid-month. I finished it. This is so good. Not a full 5 star. I would give this a 4.5 star because there are parts of this book that I think drag a little bit, but oh my gosh, what a, like, I mean, I know everybody has been talking about this book because it's so relevant to our current moment, but oh my gosh, how relevant to our current moment is this book? When I tell you that the afterword of this book is like so prophetic and haunting, I don't even know how to tell you. Oh my gosh, it was so much. This is also just like, aside from the kind of resonance that this had for what's going on in our world right now, this is also just extremely well done historical nonfiction, which I always love to see. So I would say if you are somebody who likes the history of science, which is a subgenre of historical nonfiction I really enjoy, this is really, it gave me some of the same vibes as The Age of Wonder, that book a few years ago, just in terms of, this gets into a lot of the history of how medicine evolved, specifically in the US, somewhat also in Europe. It has a lot of that kind of detail to it. The first like third of it really is a lot about that. And I thought that piece was probably my favorite part of the book. It also, I think, just chronicles how pandemics unfold in an era where they didn't even really fully understand how disease transmission works. And the fact that we are making some of the same mistakes that they did then when we know so much about how diseases are transmitted is quite depressing. But if you want to take the hopeful bent, this also shows that even amid so much death and so much suffering and having so comparatively so few resources to what we have now, there are people who are being heroic. There were people who were trying to figure out how to take care of people the best way they could. There's this really striking anecdote about this guy, this doctor who had moved to the border of Mexico to stop being a doctor and start being a rancher, and how like all of these people find him and he ends up taking care of them. Like that really, I don't know. I think that there's a lot of small stories in this that yes, are very dark, but because I'm a glass half full kind of gal, I choose to think of, hey, 100 years ago when they had so few resources compared to what we have now, they found ways to make people more comfortable, to help them get better, to, you know, try to find ways to make it work. Surely we're gonna make this work. That's what I got. That's the most hopeful take I got out of this. But this is really good. And if you get it, I think I listened to most of this on audio. I think it worked well as audio. If you're interested in that, I recommend that. And overall, this has been very hyped up this year. And I would just say, I think that this definitely deserves the hype. Not the very best nonfiction I've ever read, but like very high quality, very relevant, very readable. And then we've got 3 books that will all be in that vlog that you're seeing Sunday that I keep referencing. I'm really excited about it. I really like how it came out, so that's why I keep mentioning it. But I read 3 other books that were also good. So the lowest rated one was Emerald Blaze. I gave this 4 stars. This is the second book in the second trilogy of the Hidden Legacy series. I'm a broken record. If you guys don't know, Ilona Andrews is my favorite currently writing author duo. I absolutely love the way that they do urban fantasy romance because the worlds are always interesting, like in terms of the magic systems. There's always really fun political machinations. There are kind of individual mystery plots in each book that always are very action-packed and fun and engaging. And then there's an overarching romance that is happening. And at first I thought that the romance piece of this was gonna keep me from really getting into this, but by the end, I was so into that bit of the book. And it has the ending scene with the main couple in this is one of the most romantic scenes that I've read this year. I absolutely loved it. And it reminded me of a specific scene in the first Hidden Legacy trilogy that I absolutely loved. And this just overall puts such a smile on my face. I will say that this is probably the weakest of the Hidden Legacy books, but honestly, it is a very high 4-star, almost a 4.5, but not quite. It's still so good. If you haven't gotten to this yet and you're reading the series, like, oh, I don't think you'll be disappointed. If you haven't started reading the Hidden Legacy series and this is something that you think you'd like, what are you doing? Get your life together and start reading this series. And then the other 2, so the next 4.5 star I have is The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. And this is the 3rd in a trilogy, and I can't tell you hardly anything about this book because it's the 3rd and final book in a trilogy, and it is the best thing she has written so far, in my opinion. The problems I had with the first 2 books were not the story, but just the pacing always felt a little off in both of those books. And this one, I think, mostly doesn't have those problems. Like the pacing feels a lot more right. And I wept so many times reading this book. I felt like it was an appropriate and satisfying ending, and this book definitely cements my feeling that the overall trilogy of the Poppy Wars is one of my all-time favorite high fantasy things. Like, as an overall story arc, this is a 5-star. None of the individual books got a 5-star from me, but the overall story definitely does. And it's just so good, and I wept. There you go. I can't wait for people to read this. This comes out in November, and I think if you have been waiting to see how the series was gonna end up, I think you are gonna be satisfied. So there's that one. And then my new favorite book of the year, guys, the book that blew my little mind hole, that I was so excited. I was anticipating it because I had started to think that Rebecca Roanhorse was an auto-buy author for me, and like, she slayed this book. This book is one of the best first books in a series or trilogy that I have ever read. It opens with one of the most intense action-packed scenes ever that I literally was reading it being like, what the fuck? Like, I couldn't, it was so good. I'm worried now that I'm overhyping this, but it's so good. It is so good. When it comes out, please read this book. Well, let me give you some caveats, because this is not gonna be a book for everyone. This is dark. This is, I would say, grimdark fantasy with, it's very character driven, which you guys know I love. The magic / like god system in this, it's based on like pre-Columbian South American cultures, like indigenous cultures. That was super rad and very interesting, and I think a smart direction for her, because like she has gotten mired in a lot of drama around that, which I don't even want to get into in this video because I just don't. But I think that was smart for her to kind of like pick and choose from a few different cultures, and all of them being quite ancient. The characters of this were so good. I love them, and I can't wait to see what happens in the next 2 books. This was paced just right for me. Like it kept moving. It never got bogged down, nor did it feel like overstuffed. It was just right. There's a sea voyage in it that I was really into. this book is so good. And this is my new favorite book of the year. This is the best book that I've read so far this year. I can't wait for people to start reading this book because, oh my gosh, it's so good. I don't know what else to tell you. Like I said, I mean, definitely go, like if you don't like super violent fantasy, you're not gonna like this book, but if you do, may I commend for your delectation, Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. And yeah, I think that will do it for this month's wrap up. Like I said, just a lot of positivity here because it was a lot of really good books. And yeah, I also want to mention that I did hit 20,000 subscribers, which blows my little mind hole, much like Black Sun did. And I'm really thankful for all of you guys. And I hope that I continue to bring you content you enjoy and that you find helpful. That is my commitment to you guys. So I hope I can continue to do that. I am going to start making some changes in terms of some of the kind of like intro outro things. I know people have been watching for a long time. That might be jarring, but it's been 3 years. I feel like it's time for a change. So just a heads up there. But I think that's all the housekeeping I have. And thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it. And we'll see where things go, man. This has been growing a lot and I find that a little intimidating, but I'm trying to just focus on giving you guys good content that I feel proud of. So with that, definitely let me know how your reading month went in August in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, along with a link to register to vote. And if you have already voted and already checked to make sure that you are still on your local rolls, have you made a plan to vote? I am going to early vote in person as soon as I can at the smallest polling place in my county. That is my plan. Have you made yours? And yeah, I think with that will do it. I hope you are having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.